Lakers security is scrambling to bury the footage, but the damage is done. Shaquille O'Neal cornered LeBron James in a stadium hallway right after their humiliating loss to the Knicks. What happened next nearly escalated into an all-out brawl, and it all ignited from one single moment that proves this is a different league.
Our fans to understand that playing 82 games in the 80s and 90s is not the same as playing 82 games in the 2020s.
According to eyewitnesses, Shaq was already posted up in the tunnel before the final buzzer even sounded, standing like a human barricade in front of the locker room entrance. He posed a single question that brought the entire Lakers team to a dead halt, forcing a terrified Rob Pelinka to try and wedge himself between the two superstars. In that moment, LeBron knew his latest podcast soundbites hadn't just gone viral. They had started a war with the one man whose shadow loomed large enough to eclipse his entire legacy. Just wait until you hear the exact line Shaq used to silence LeBron's entire entourage and why insiders are calling this the final chapter for King James. Look, if you found that podcast controversial, the video the Lakers are now desperately trying to erase is infinitely more explosive. We're talking about a night that was supposed to be a celebration of longevity, but instead became a showcase of decline on February 1st, 2026, as the Lakers were utterly dismantled in Madison Square Garden. They fell 112-100 in a game that was never truly competitive, with OG Anunoby and Landry Shamet scoring at will, as if it were a light shoot-around. Luka Doncic dropped 30 points, while LeBron managed just 22, looking every single one of his 41 years on the court. After the game, he was trudging through the MSG tunnel, likely crafting excuses for his next podcast, when he came face-to-face with a mountain of a man. Shaq was leaning against the wall, and it was clear he wasn't there to trade pleasantries. He was 325 pounds of raw 90s-era intimidation, completely obstructing the path, and witnesses say the atmosphere turned ice cold in an instant. Shaq didn't even bother with a greeting. He stared directly into LeBron's eyes and delivered a line that made the air crackle. How can you claim this is hard when you compete in a league where staring at an opponent for too long draws a foul? Naturally, LeBron attempted to lecture him on the nuances of high-level basketball, citing the speed of the game in 2026. But Shaq wasn't having any of it. He immediately shut him down, shouting back, "Speed is irrelevant when defenders aren't even permitted to touch you. You only bring up speed because you're afraid to confess your body is aging and you're thriving in a soft era." And then Shaq went for the kill. He brought up Anthony Davis, Joel Embiid, and a host of other stars who frequently miss games, using them as Exhibit A for his argument. Shaq's blistering point was that in his era, you played until the bone was showing. Today's players, he argued, sit out for 3 weeks after landing awkwardly. He flat out branded LeBron's podcast take as delusional. But that isn't even the most insane part. The confrontation became so heated that personnel had to physically intervene to separate Shaq from LeBron. You had Lakers staff in expensive suits trying to budge a 7-foot tank, while everyone else just stood by watching from the periphery. And just hold on until we examine the actual statistics from that time, because our findings confirm the 90s NBAA was an entirely different beast. But before we get to that, it's crucial to understand what finally made Shaq explode. He represents the last of a vanishing breed. He is one of the rare few who has experienced both worlds, witnessing the game devolve from a true physical contest into the sanitized, finesse-focused product we have today. He entered the league in '92, battling 80s enforcers who were conditioned to decapitate you on a drive to the basket. He witnessed the elimination of hand-checking rules in 2004. He saw the flagrant foul system evolve into a protective bubble and watched the court spread out until it could stretch no further. So when he hears LeBron suggest the game is tougher now, it feels like a profound disrespect to every icon who had to bleed for a layup. And don't be fooled by the talk of speed. LeBron loves to point out the higher pace of today's game, but if you examine the data, you'll see he's manipulating the numbers. Back in 1985, the average pace was 102. Here in 2026, it has actually dipped to around 99.5. We're talking about the 85 Nuggets who ran at a pace of 107, a rate that would cause modern teams to collapse from exhaustion by the third quarter. And what about the Showtime Lakers, who consistently played above a pace of 100? The key distinction is that they achieved this while being hammered, held, and thrown into the courtside seats. There was no such thing as freedom of movement back then. There was only a battle for survival. You want to talk about difficult? Consider the Jordan rules. The Pistons didn't just have a strategy, they had a blueprint for how to inflict pain on Michael Jordan without getting arrested. If MJ drove to the rim, he was guaranteed to end up on the hardwood. End of story. There were no soft fouls for incidental contact. Now contrast that with a superstar in 2026. LeBron pours $1 million a year into his body, utilizing cryo chambers and personal chefs while traveling on private jets equipped with full-sized beds. Back in the 80s, Barkley and Magic were flying commercial jostling for armrest space with ordinary fans before checking into standard hotels. Shaq highlighted this very point in 2025, stating that LeBron's longevity is a direct result of playing in a watered-down era. It's less physical, and he's always done this his whole career. He never really done that. So no, but the fact that it's less physical, I think it definitely helps. He was speaking the absolute truth. If LeBron had to endure coach seats and take beatings from Rick Mahorn on a nightly basis, there is no chance he would still be competing at age 41. Even the GOAT Michael Jordan addressed this back in June of 2025. MJ didn't just question the competitive spirit of today's players. He blew the lid off the whole load management scheme, lamenting the loss of truly committed stars in the NBA. That type of competition, that type of competitiveness is what I live for. And I miss it. I miss that aspect of playing the game of basketball. Jordan played all 82 games in 9 different seasons, and Kobe Bryant once famously played through a broken finger, refusing to be sidelined. Yet today, LeBron's camp justifies resting any time a knee feels the slightest bit sore. That's precisely why Shaq's Power Rankings list on Netflix from earlier this year made such a monumental statement. When prompted to rank his top 10 all-time players, he placed MJ at number 1 and Kobe at number 2, sliding LeBron down to the 3rd spot. Number 3, I'm going to go with the King LeBron James. Number 2, I'm going with rest in peace, Kobe Bean Bryant. At number 1, the greatest player of all time is Michael Jordan. And Shaq's reasoning was elegantly simple. It all comes down to that killer instinct. Jordan never needed a media platform to broadcast how tough things were. He simply went out and demonstrated it, demolishing anyone who stood in his path, regardless of how many times they tried to physically break him. But if you believe Shaq is the only legend fed up with the modern excuses, you haven't heard what Paul Pierce had to say about LeBron's speed argument, because his response was more than just a disagreement. He absolutely lost his mind. But the real story behind Shaq's fury in that tunnel goes far beyond some podcast clip. It's rooted in a fundamental truth, understood by the Titans who built this league. LeBron lacks the one asset. $1 billion can't purchase the fear factor. Shaq had been broadcasting this sentiment throughout 2025 and 2026, stating plainly that no one was ever truly afraid of LeBron. I didn't think players really feared LeBron like they did Jordan. I've never really heard any players say they fear LeBron. And he has a point, because while opponents respected LeBron's statistics, they weren't having nightmares about the matchup. No one ever thought I have to face LeBron today. This is going to be a living hell. But stepping onto the court against MJ or Kobe was a different beast entirely. You knew they were coming to extinguish your will to compete. The fear wasn't just about losing the game. It was the sheer terror of being utterly humiliated, of having your spirit shattered in front of a global audience. Now contrast that killer instinct with the buddy-buddy content-driven culture that defines the league today. LeBron is co-hosting podcasts with rivals like Tyrese Halliburton, sharing laughs as if they're at some off-season retreat. This represents a seismic shift from the 90s, which is precisely why Shaq's all-time ranking was so deliberate, MJ at number 1, Kobe at number 2, and LeBron at a distant number 3. Having played alongside both legends, Shaq made it clear that if your life depended on one shot, you'd hand the ball to the Mamba, not the 41-year-old, more concerned with his public image and being liked by everyone. And for anyone who claims the 90s were a slower era, they need to rewatch the 1989 Pistons vs. Bulls series. Bill Laimbeer, Rick Mahorn, and Charles Oakley weren't just playing defense. They were committing acts that bordered on aggravated assault. Bill Laimbeer made it his personal mission to ensure Larry Bird hobbled off the court with a new injury, a tactic that was considered standard practice back then. And you know what? Larry Bird would just show up the next game, ready to dominate all over again. In today's game, those same plays would earn you an immediate ejection and a 3-game suspension. You would assume that by now, LeBron would have learned to show some deference to the Warriors who paved his way. But instead, he had the audacity to claim on that podcast that simple calf injuries are the modern equivalent of high ankle sprains. I think when I first came into the league, some of the biggest concerns of injuries was like, a high ankle sprain. You was afraid to step on somebody's ankle because there was 4 or 5 guys sitting in the paint, If you land on somebody's ankle, you get a high ankle sprain, you're out 4 to 6 weeks. Now, that's not really much of you don't really see that as much now because the game is so spread open. It's so much pace. But now you see the new high ankle sprain is the calf. Let that sink in. He's arguing that in this faster-paced era, minor muscle ailments are somehow on par with the devastating joint injuries that players endured in the 1990s. The suggestion alone was enough to make Shaq's blood boil, especially since he spent his entire career being hacked and battered like a lumberjack felling a redwood. And what about Isaiah Thomas? Does anyone remember the gauntlet he ran in the 1988 finals? Isaiah played on a single leg, his ankle swollen to the size of a grapefruit, and still managed to drop 25 points in a single quarter. Yet LeBron contends that his era, with its scheduled rest and astronomical salaries, is somehow more grueling. His other flimsy justification is that the 1980s NBA was populated by 4 lumbering players just clogging the paint, implying they were out of shape. Shaq perceived that as a profound insult. This was the era of Hakeem David Robinson and a young explosive Shaquille O'Neal. These men were not lazy. They were apex predators, 7-foot behemoths who could sprint the length of the court and protect the rim with a ferocity that would make today's bigs look like timid children. Recently, when NBC News asked Shaq for his ultimate starting 5, his answer was telling. He named MJ Kobe, Karl Malone, Larry Bird, and Hakeem Olajuwon. So if you had to do your all-time NBA starting 5, do you have 1 Kobe and Mike? Okay, that's the 1 and the 2. The 3 I got to go with Bird. Okay, 4 I got to go with Malone. And 5 I got to go with Hakeem. You left somebody out. No. The omission was deafening. He left LeBron off the list entirely, even excluding himself to make a point. The message was unmistakable. When asked about it, Shaq was stone-faced. He essentially communicated that if victory is the only objective, he's choosing warriors who aren't distracted by their podcast metrics. But if you believe Shaq was the only legend enraged by those podcast comments, you haven't been listening. Paul Pierce's response was even more volatile. The truth didn't just disagree. He took LeBron's entire argument about speed and pace and ceremoniously threw it into a dumpster fire on national television. Appearing on his new show, No Fouls Given, Pierce looked ready to explode through the screen. He was seated next to Danny Green, who was attempting to make a case for the modern game. But Pierce immediately shut him down. He erupted, "LeBron is talking about speed, man. We played in the 2000s when you had to physically fight your way through a screen. Now you just switch, take a nap, and call it high IQ defense." Pierce's core argument is that the speed LeBron boasts about is an illusion enabled by referees who penalize any form of contact. Back in his day, if you tried to run a fast-paced offense without a strategy, a powerhouse like Ben Wallace or Kevin Garnett would introduce your body to the basket stanchion. There was a steep physical price to be paid just for the privilege of crossing the half-court line. And it's crucial to remember the context here. This isn't just some bitter old-timer complaining. The rivalry between Pierce and LeBron was forged in the fire of the 2008 playoffs, culminating in a legendary Game 7 where both men scored over 40. That series was a relic of an NBA that still valued grit, a final echo of the 90s Warrior ethos. These guys used to have spitting contests in the preseason, for crying out loud. And Pierce has never let it go that LeBron had to flee to Miami and assemble a super team just to overcome him. From Pierce's perspective, LeBron is trying to rewrite history and claim the game is harder now to justify his own struggles against the league's rising stars in 2026. And it makes you wonder, for a player once celebrated for his incredible power, why is he now advocating for a softer brand of basketball precisely at the moment he's aging out of the league? Pierce didn't stop there, adding, "The switching defense today is basically a cheat code for lazy superstars. In the 90s or the 2000s, if you were guarding a star, you stayed on his hip. You fought through the hit. You moved under the screen and you dealt with the pain. Today, you just point at your friend, switch the player, and hope the other guy misses a wide-open three. So many times I'm bruised up after the game. Oh, my shoulder hurts. It's definitely physical. Physical. It's hurting. Then how come guys used to play 75 games a season back then? Because they were just tougher. Laughter. The game has changed completely. He concluded the discussion by declaring, "Basketball today is just too soft." He looked Danny Green in the eye and said the only reason stars put up such astronomical numbers is because music. The league has permanently eliminated the role of the enforcer. You can't get away with playing like a Charles Oakley or a Rick Mahorn anymore. The league office would have you suspended by November. But what came next was the part that truly sent shockwaves through the sport. On January 29th, for the first time in 21 brutal years, an entire generation in basketball terms, the NBA, revealed its all-star starters, and the name LeBron James was nowhere to be found. Let the absurdity of that sink in. For as long as most of us can remember, this man was an automatic, undeniable selection for the All-Star game. But the league had officially turned the page on his era. Luka Doncic is the new face of the franchise in Los Angeles, music. And the consensus from fans, media, and players has relegated LeBron to a figure of the past. When the final votes were tallied for the Western Conference frontcourt, he was tied for 9th place, earning a paltry 3 media votes, music, and finishing 9th overall. 9th? That is the equivalent of being politely shown the door. And if we're being honest, the appetite for watching a 41-year-old superstar slow down the pace of the game has vanished. This narrative he's pushing about the modern game being tougher is the last play he has left in his book. Music. Just consider his logic. If the game is genuinely faster and more demanding physically, as he insists, why are athletes now playing deep into their 40s? Back in the 1990s, the sheer brutality of the sport would have shattered a player's body by the time they hit 33. No one could endure 40 minutes of what was essentially a nightly street brawl and expect to have a career that lasted until age 40. LeBron's longevity isn't a testament to his greatness. It's the ultimate proof that he's competing in a softer era, one where load management and strategic rest can pave the way for a 20-year career. Shaq immediately recognized this hypocrisy when the broadcast crew made their reserve picks on January 29th. In a deliberately cutting move, Shaq left LeBron completely off his ballot. A couple of guys that's only been slowed down by Father Time. I don't want to see the king come off no bench. I want. So you don't want to see him in the game at all? No. Make no mistake. That was not some gentle remark. That was Shaquille O'Neal declaring to the world that the king is now a legacy selection, a pity pick, and that he'd rather not see him on the court at all. Even Charles Barkley didn't hold back. Chuck delivered a bombshell stating that LeBron's time in LA is over and predicting he'll return to Cleveland for one last farewell tour. Well, there's one thing I'm positive of. This is his final season as a Laker. He's not going to be with the Lakers next year. I've always said I'd like to see him finish up in Cleveland. I wouldn't be against him getting dealt to Cleveland this year. And suddenly, everything clicked into place. LeBron had to have known the All-Star voting would be a public relations nightmare for his brand. That podcast was his calculated preemptive strike. He needed to shift the conversation back to the timeless debate between him and Michael Jordan before the world acknowledged that he wasn't even considered a top 5 player in his own conference anymore. But the most damning part for LeBron is that the Lakers' own icons are siding with Shaq. During an interview back in September 2025, Magic Johnson didn't even hesitate. He named Michael Jordan the GOAT not for his career stats, but for his sheer dominance over the game. That's what made him a bad boy and the greatest to ever do it. Don't get it twisted now. I love LeBron, but what Magic was really telling everyone is that playing for a long time doesn't make you the greatest. It just makes you a long-tenured employee. For Shaq, being a Laker isn't a marketing opportunity, it's a code of honor. This is the man who delivered a three-peat from 2000 to 2002. He understands precisely what it took to win at the highest level. It wasn't about speed or producing shows with your friends. It was 48 minutes of pure warfare, getting slammed to the ground by teams like the Spurs and Kings that were engineered for the sole purpose of stopping him. He music had giants like Vlade Divac and Chris Webber throwing their bodies at him on every possession. So when LeBron appears on a podcast and suggests that today's game is more difficult because it's faster, it's not just a flawed argument to Shaq, it's a profound insult to the legacy of the Lakers franchise. And the rest of the Laker family has grown tired of it as well. On January 28th, Music 2026 five-time champion Ron Harper, a man who played alongside both the Jordan-era Bulls and the Shaq-led Lakers, finally reached his breaking point. After watching the clip of LeBron comparing minor pains to major ankle injuries, he didn't bother with a lengthy response. He fired off a simple post on X. These excuses are stupid. To put this in perspective, Ron Harper is 62 years old and still carries himself with more grit than half the current league. He's looking at LeBron and thinking, dude, at 36, I was starting 80 games a season guarding the opponent's best player without the benefit of massive contracts or advanced recovery technology. For men like Shaq and Harper, LeBron isn't just defending a new era of basketball. He's attempting to rewrite the history of their sacrifice just to make his own extended career appear more impressive. The situation in Los Angeles is reaching a fever pitch because the fan base that revered Magic and Shaq has no patience for complaints about minor muscle strains. They see a 41-year-old who appears more invested in his media empire than in the Lakers' defensive integrity. But the most outrageous aspect of this entire ordeal is how disingenuous it all seems. LeBron has built a career feigning admiration for the old guard whenever it served his own narrative. But the second the GOAT debate gets uncomfortable, he moves the goalposts. All of a sudden, the era that music produced legends like Michael Jordan and Shaquille O'Neal wasn't tougher. It was merely slower and less complex. It is a desperate act of self-preservation. LeBron understands that the 2026 All-Star snub wasn't an anomaly. It was a clear signal that his reign is over. So he uses his platform as a first strike, essentially arguing, if I'm not on top anymore, it's only because the game is harder for me than it ever was for Mike. But you can't have it both ways. You can't claim you're the greatest because of your longevity, while simultaneously implying you only lasted this long because the league abandoned its physicality. If the 1990s were truly so easy, why did it take a player like LeBron until 2026 to discover he could no longer even crack the starting lineup for the All-Star team? At this moment, LeBron James has officially forfeited his standing among the most revered icons in NBA history. Music. He thought he was making a brilliant chess move, but all he accomplished was proving he doesn't belong in the same tier as the very legends he slighted. You can keep the scoring record, LeBron. You can play for 25 years in a sanitized no-contact league, but you will never command the respect of the men you just dismissed as weak. A line in the sand has been drawn. So for everyone watching, a choice must be made. Do you side with the titans of the 1990s who played through torn ligaments and fractured bones? Or do you stand with the king of podcasts? The legends have already made their decision, and they're standing with Shaq.